Hi, welcome to the TC. My name's David, and today we're going to be taking a look at the iPhone 11 Pro Max in 2024. Now, with iOS 18 installed, we're going to be taking a look at how this 2019 flagship phone holds up today, and if it's still worth your consideration. So, let's get into it. So I'm going to be doing the rest of this review using the iPhone 11 Pro Max to actually record it, so you guys can get an idea of how the iPhone 11 Pro Max camera on the rear is and how 4K video holds up. So I'm recording right now in 4K at 30 frames per second, so you guys can let me know how it looks. So I want to start with the design of the iPhone 11 Pro Max because I think it is one of the biggest differences compared to the newer iPhones. This was the last generation of iPhone to have the rounded corners. And I think it does kind of date it just because it has those rounded corners and we've been using the squared off edges for a while now. However, I still think that the iPhone 11 Pro Max is actually more comfortable to use than the newer iPhones, just because it has the rounded corners, it fits more comfortably in the hand. Of course, this is all personal preference, but in my opinion, I do feel like the 11 Pro Max and the 11 Pro, actually the entire 11 series, is a much more comfortable design. So the thing is though, the round corners were kind of iconic during the time that this iPhone came out. But since they switched to the squared off edges, I do think that this iPhone does have a dated design. And you know, if you're trying to have like a newer iPhone look, obviously this won't have that. But obviously that's just kind of something that is going to be personal preference. But one thing to consider too is that this iPhone, even though it is pretty slim, it's still pretty heavy. And I think this is just down to it being the Pro Max model, so it is the biggest model. So if you are considering like the heft of your phone, then yeah, I do think that you should think about also looking at the regular 11 Pro, that is a smaller phone, or even the iPhone 11. But you know, the 11 Pro Max does have the biggest screen, and therefore it's going to have the most weight. So just something to consider. And you know, speaking of that screen, the 6.5-inch Retina XDR display that the 11 Pro Max has is still a really great display. I think that it has aged pretty well. I think the only thing that really dates it though is the notch on the top. And you know, we're coming to a point now where the iPhone is kind of settling on the dynamic island, and there's rumors that the iPhone 17 might just have a hole punch. Having the notch on the 11 Pro Max does have kind of like a dated feel to it. However, I don't think it's something that's necessarily a bad thing, and most people won't even notice it in day-to-day usage. I mean, the iPhone 12 Pro Max and 12 Pro have the same kind of notch. It's just something to consider. It is kind of like a dated aspect of this iPhone. It's kind of a reminder of like the past designs. So yeah, just consider the notch as something that is kind of dating this phone, as well as the bezels, surprisingly. So because this does have the rounded edges, it does have a rounder edge to the bezels, and the bezels themselves are actually thicker. So just a year later with the 12 Pro Max, we jumped to a 6.7-inch screen, and that was because they were able to reduce the size of the bezels a little bit. And of course with the iPhone 15 Pro, they reduced them even more. So yeah, it's something that you don't really like notice unless you're holding them side to side, but the bezel difference does make a difference in screen size. So just something to consider. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the performance of the iPhone 11 Pro Max with iOS 18 in mind. So I've been running the iOS 18 beta since they released the original public beta in July, and my experience with it has been pretty positive, I would say. The biggest thing I noticed with the beta of iOS 18 on the 11 Pro Max is that there is instances where the phone will get pretty warm just because it's trying to load something. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the typical problem that we're seeing with a lot of iPhones. And I think it's just what's happening is the phone is ramping up the CPU performance for those like dedicated tasks. And we're seeing it more often now because these iPhones are getting older. So they're using more CPU performance in order to get the same like speed that we've been expecting from these phones with the newer software. So I think the biggest problem that this phone has is honestly just that it has 4 gigabytes of RAM. And I don't think that's enough necessarily for the usage cases that we're seeing now for iOS 18. And it's unfortunate because I feel like if it just had 6 GB, it would have been a lot better. Of course, the new iPhones have 8 GB of RAM, and I think that does make a pretty huge difference in terms of like performance and keeping apps open. I noticed with this iPhone that apps will close in the background. So yeah, you just have to consider that, if you're not like a super high, demanding user, then the iPhone 11 Pro Max performance shouldn't be a problem. But I think that we're starting to see its age now, especially since it's about 5 years old. So yeah, just something to consider. The A13 Bionic in the phone is still a pretty good processor, I would say. However, you are going to start to see some lag in some of the system UI and just opening apps and using apps. It is a little bit sluggish compared to something like an iPhone 13 Pro Max. So yeah, just something to consider. Also, I want to think about the longevity of the iPhone 11 Pro Max, how much life it still has left. Apple does have pretty long support for their phones. However, the iPhone 11 Pro Max is around 5 years old now, and I wouldn't be surprised if next year presents itself as one of the last updates that this iPhone is going to be getting. Since they're pushing AI so hard, and unfortunately, all of the iPhones below the 15 Pro aren't even going to be receiving any of the AI upgrades. So it's kind of a double-edged sword to have an older iPhone because they're not pushing a lot of these huge headline features they're talking about to them because of a lack of RAM. And we know it's a lack of RAM just because the only iPhone that has support for the Apple Intelligence is the 15 Pro series, and those have 8 GB of RAM. Not even the 14 Pro got AI, and it's a little disappointing to think about because it's like you spend so much money on a phone like this, you're not even going to get one of the headline features just a year later. So yeah, just consider that, it is an older phone, so you're not going to be getting all of the features. I think for most users, this isn't really a problem, just because I can't imagine a lot of people are going to be using the new Apple Intelligence features. Plus, the features aren't even out yet. So like a lot of the Apple Intelligence and upgraded Siri features aren't going to be coming until a later update. So even if you have an iPhone capable of Apple Intelligence, you're not going to be seeing the real benefits of it until the new software comes out. I think for most people, Apple Intelligence and AI is not going to be a deal breaker. It's just something to consider with the age of the phone and also software updates later on that you might not get as much support. So one thing I think that the iPhones have been doing really well over the past couple years has actually been the camera system. And if you use an iPhone 11 Pro Max camera system, this was the first to have the 3 triple camera layout on the back. And honestly, I think that having the triple camera system is actually a huge benefit to the 11 Pro Max, just because you're getting such a versatile system for having an ultra wide, you're going to have a telephoto, and of course your main camera. And yeah, I think that, this triple camera system has aged pretty well. The one thing I will say is that the ultra wide is not super great. You're going to get a lot of grain on it because it is kind of a smaller sensor and it does have a slower lens. So it's something to consider. However, this was the first iPhone to introduce night mode, and I think that was a huge thing to have. And it does help this phone with nighttime exposures. However, it's not as good, obviously, as like the newer iPhones. But for a lot of people, I feel like having night mode itself is a huge benefit to having the 11 Pro. And yeah, I think that this phone has aged pretty well in terms of the camera system. I'll put some examples so you guys can see how the cameras look. I also wanted to take a look at the front-facing camera on the iPhone 11 Pro Max. So this is what the front-facing camera does look like. It does record in 4K, so I think that is a pretty huge benefit to having this camera system. And this was the first iPhone that introduced slow-mo selfies. I don't know a single person who has ever used it, but if you want the feature, it is there. So Honestly, the newer iPhones have more AI features like the photonic engine that enables Deep Fusion 2.0. But this was the first iPhone to introduce Deep Fusion, and I think that all of these camera upgrades that have been happening to the iPhone over the years have been kind of incremental, and you're not going to see a real benefit unless you upgrade every like 3, 4, 5 years. So I feel like for most people, the iPhone 11 Pro series has a pretty good camera system, and you shouldn't really have any problems with it unless you're trying to take photos and videos in super low light. So the battery on the iPhone 11 Pro Max is one of its standout features when it first came out, just because it is a bigger phone, of course, and it does have a bigger battery. And the 11 Pro and Pro Max actually had a bigger battery than the 10s and 10s Max. And yeah, you definitely felt those battery life gains with this phone. However, do consider the age of this phone now. It is 5 years old, and of course, as batteries get older, they degrade and they don't hold as much capacity. If you're looking at buying a used iPhone 11 Pro Max, you definitely need to consider the battery health. Now, my iPhone 11 Pro Max is at 91% battery health, and I feel like it's a good figure for, how a 2-year-old phone might be holding up. This phone was replaced by Apple in 2021, so it did have a new battery and everything from Apple themselves. So yeah, that is something to consider. It is longer lasting probably than most people's iPhone 11 Pro Maxes now. You can buy a battery replacement from Apple for $99. However, if you are planning to keep the phone for longer than 3 or 4 years, honestly, I would just consider putting that money towards a newer iPhone just so that you get longer support. So yeah, one of the things that this iPhone doesn't have though, which I feel like really hurts it, is MagSafe, because MagSafe, I use it all the time now, and it's honestly a really great feature to have. There's so many accessories that you can buy with MagSafe, and of course I love using my MagSafe charger. However, this iPhone does not have MagSafe. The only way to charge it is through the lightning cable or through regular Qi wireless charging. And yeah, I wouldn't really recommend using Qi just because it's so slow and it does heat up the phone quite a bit. So honestly, just plug it in like normal and you're good to go. This does have faster charging with the cord as well. I believe it's like 20-watt charging, and it's okay. It'll get the job done, but it's not as fast as, a lot of more modern phones. And of course, you do have the lightning cable still. This doesn't have USB-C, so if you're looking to have everything USB-C, obviously you have to look at something like the 15 series. So is the iPhone 11 Pro Max still worth it in 2024, considering iOS 18 and how much software support it still has? And now, I feel like this is going to be a question that depends on your personal usage of your phone. If you're a heavy user, I would definitely advise you to look towards something like the 13 Pro Max and higher, just because you're going to get a much smoother experience. And I feel like the 13 series was definitely a really good series to look at, just because the Pro series had the 120 hertz displays, you got the benefits of the better camera system, and the battery life on those phones were stellar. So yeah, I feel like if you're looking to have a cheaper iPhone, but you still want really good performance and battery life, definitely look at the 13 series and above. However, if you are kind of more of a casual user, I feel like the 11 Pro Max is still a pretty good phone, but do consider that it might not be getting as much software support left. If you're looking to keep your phone for a longer amount of time, I would look at something a little bit newer. I wouldn't be super concerned with the AI features coming out with iOS 18. Of course, this doesn't have any of the AI features, and yeah, that's a bummer, but I feel like for most people right now, AI isn't really something that they're looking at using. Just consider that, I would wait maybe a year to look at what Apple Intelligence looks like and then make your decision from there. But as it is right now, I don't feel like Apple Intelligence is a huge deal breaker. More the software support is the bigger deal breaker. So I feel like the iPhone 11 Pro Max had a pretty good run. However, it is definitely an older phone now. And, with software support coming to an end, probably within the next 2 years, it is something I would consider not looking at, just because I would definitely push people to look at something newer like the 13 Pro Max, just because you're going to get more software support. It is a much faster phone, and it feels more faster just because it has 120 hertz. Plus, the battery life of the iPhone 11 series is probably going to be not anywhere near as good as it used to be, just because the software is pushing these phones harder, and most people's iPhone 11s are going to have a degraded battery. So yeah, that's it. The video. Thanks for watching. And if you like what you saw, consider subscribing to see more content just like this. Remember to leave a like down below and leave a comment. Do you guys have an iPhone 11 Pro Max or an iPhone 11 Pro? How do you like it? Do you still use it today? I want to know. So that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.